and so on. Life is like that. All organisms in this world or in this universe are supporting other organisms in one way or another. If you look at nature, you see that so clearly. Ugh, you say, when you see a lion killing an antelope. But that's life. Everything's supporting everything else. This is the way of life. But on the other hand, we should only do it as much as is necessary for us to be valuable people or beings. That is what the true law of life is saying. So therefore, if we go over the top on that, we can't help slandering in terms of killing insects and so on. Or even we can't help these flashing thoughts which may be destructive some way or other. Because we're human beings. And human beings have the 9 worlds in them as well as the world of Buddhahood. Even the Buddha, we're taught, has the other 9 worlds in him. Hell, hunger, animality, all exist in the Buddha's life. If that wasn't so, he wouldn't be a human being. And this devilish or negative force of life is there for a most important purpose. And that purpose is that we have to battle against it if we're going to be happy. That's the purpose of it. It creates the dynamism, creative energy of life, this battle between negative and positive, value and anti-value inside us. So everything is valuable in Buddhism. We can't deny its existence because it's there. All right. So that's the first point, which you can ponder on while you have your coffee break for half an hour. All right? Thank you very much. He says at one point, those people who oppose the theory of punishment are no different from those who are seduced by the superficial compassion of Shakyamuni's Buddhism. I say that they do not embody the true spirit of Nichiren Shoshu. That sounds as if he's putting down Shakyamuni Buddha, but that is not so. What he means by superficial compassion is that the great difference between Shakyamuni's Buddhism, which is known as the Buddhism of the harvest, and the Buddhism of Nichiren Daishonin, which is known as the Buddhism of the sowing. That is to say, in Shakyamuni's Buddhism, people practiced for eons before they were ready to attain Buddhahood, which they were able to do so during Shakyamuni's lifetime and in the first 500 years or so following Shakyamuni's death. Whereas Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism, the Buddhism of the sowing, is that in this lifetime you can attain Buddhahood. In fact, of course, what Nichiren Daishonin taught was that the moment you chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, you are in the state of Buddhahood. Though, of course, your conscious mind can't grasp that or believe it. So the process of the human revolution is changing that karma, which gets in the way of you enjoying your Buddhahood to the full and using it to the full. So in terms of compassion, Shakyamuni's Buddhism was for a quite restricted number of people. The people who could practice in his times and after he died and attain the state of Buddhahood were people who either gave up their ordinary lives and became monks, or people who were rich enough to be able to give up all their time to the practice. So complicated it was, so lengthy. So, and then only very few would ultimately attain the state of Buddhahood. So compared with that, it's not saying anything against it. It was an essential first step. But compared with that and Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism, which is open to everyone who has the good fortune, of course, to find the Gohonzon innately in their karma, has that good fortune to find it and practice it, is promised that they can attain Buddhahood in this lifetime. Do you follow? So the depth of compassion, therefore, of Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism, as compared with Shakyamuni's, is tremendous in comparison. But of course, that is not saying that Shakyamuni himself wasn't compassionate. He was a Buddha, and no doubt he was compassionate as Nichiren Daishonin was. But it was Nichiren Daishonin's mission to appear in order to spread the true law. So in the Lotus Sutra, it says very clearly, explains that the pure law, which was Shakyamuni's, will gradually lose its power to help people overcome their sufferings until you reach this latter day of the law and the age of the period called Mappo, when the world is in a state of great chaos, which I'm sure you discussed during the lecture on the Risho Ankokuron. Until that time comes, this age of Mappo, in the midst of this chaos and suffering, what Shakyamuni called the great pure law would appear, taught by a votary of the Lotus, a great votary of the Lotus Sutra. You understand? So I didn't want you to be misled by the sort of sound of that particular sentence. And no time ever has Nichiren Daishonin, or for that matter, any president of the Soka Gakkai or anyone else, slighted Shakyamuni himself. Certainly not. Right, so we'll now read on. Where have we got to? There we are.
Meanwhile.
Right, off you go.
Meanwhile, the Japanese government, in the midst of World War II, had plunged the whole nation into the abyss of war. Firmly embracing Nichiren Daishonin's spirit during wartime, President Makaguchi resisted a government order to worship the sun goddess of Shintoism, an evil policy that permeated the nation. The military government of the time must have been deceived by the misconception that the sun goddess had generated the kamikaze, sacred wind that helped push back the Mongolian invasions in the 13th century. The government was unaware of the fact that the kamikaze arose from the prayer of the true Buddha, Nichiren Daishonin. The military government neither heeded nor referenced Nichiren Daishonin's teachings.
Should be respected, I think.
The military government neither heeded nor respected Nichiren Daishonin's teachings, failing to recognize that because of its slanderous acts, Japan was attacked by Mongol forces. The Japanese military government employed the base evil philosophy of Shintoism to unify the nation's spirit, whereas the United States followed a philosophy of pragmatism, as represented by the American philosopher John Dewey. This, along with the lack of materials, had already determined the outcome of the war. It was unavoidable that the military authorities went insane as the nation experienced a total defeat. The supreme philosophy of Buddhism clearly explained that Japan would be defeated if it operated based on Shintoism. In fact, the military even attempted to burn those of the Daishonin's documents that expounded his most important teachings. The military held the reins of authority. It was like a knife in the hands of a crazy person. Intimidated and virtually scared to death by the military government, people foolishly agreed to build shrines to the sun goddess in their homes, which they worshipped blindly. In these circumstances, President Makaguchi strictly pointed out to the Soka Gakkai members that worshipping the sun goddess is absolutely opposed to the spirit of Nichiren Shoshu's doctrines. Swayed by the military, the Japanese nation took strange actions. Without understanding how ideologically confused the people would become, the Japanese nation attempted to unify all religions. It went so far as to encourage all citizens to worship the sun goddess and ask her to unleash kamikaze. Those who refused were accused of being enemies of the nation and proponents of treacherous anti-war thoughts. For the first time in the history of Japan, virtually the entire nation adopted faith in the sun goddess. The correct definition of the sun goddess is a deity that protects the Lotus Sutra. In other words, only when we pray to the Lotus Sutra will the sun goddess reveal her power. However, the whole nation, ignorant of the importance of worshipping the Lotus Sutra of Nichiren Daishonin, merely offered prayers to the sun goddess. As a result, devils, rather than the answer to people's prayers, dwelt in the talisman of the sun goddess, and the nation virtually became psychotic. Nikko Shonin, founder of Taisekaji, states in his 26 admonitions, "Believers shall not visit heretical shrines." In this spirit, President Makaguchi made a strong declaration. "We have no choice but to propagate the Daigo Honzen, the true intent of Nichiren Daishonin, in order to save our nation." How can we save our country? Merely by praying to the sun goddess.
Thank you. So as you can see, it gives a good idea of the chaos that existed in Japan at that time. And Mr. Toda, 2 or 3 times in that piece, which is we've just read, talks about strange actions, and then finally says the whole nation becomes psychotic. So this is all in it, representing the general punishment which Japan suffered as a result of their hundreds of years of persecuting the followers of Nichiren Daishonin and of ignoring the teachings and indeed laughing at them. So as a result, the Japanese nation suffered this tremendous punishment in terms of the 3 calamities, 7 disasters. So World War II is looked upon as a direct result of that. And in the Risho Ankokuron, which you had a lecture on earlier, it clearly states that the benevolent forces of the universe in Nichiren Daishonin's time, due to slander again, had left the nation. What this means is, in case you're still not quite clear, that the benevolent forces of the universe that surround us are fed by our positive, creative, energetic spirit. If the people of a nation sink into apathy, then inevitably that powerful life force disappears, and the benevolent forces can't respond in the same way. I mean, an example I often use, a simple one, is that the sun is one of the greatest of the benevolent forces of the universe, isn't it? The sun enables things to grow and is normally looked upon as something brilliant and bright. You have the sunflowers looking after you during this course. But if you're so stupid or lazy or, stupid or lazy, that's enough, to go and lie in the sun in a place like Hawaii too long, if you just stay there, the sun will kill you. You see? So all these benevolent forces too have both negative and positive within them, just the same as we do. And they respond to our own life force or the lack of it. So, as you know, in Nichiren Daishonin's time, the main religion being followed by the people was what's known as Nembutsu. That if you chant Nam Amida Butsu, then you can't do anything about your present life, but after you die, you'll go to a sort of paradise. Great pure land. So this bred apathy. The situation, it's a sort of, this awful word, catch-22 situation. The people's apathy grew. As a result, the powerful life force of the nation as a whole began to disappear. And that in turn led to great suffering. So Nichiren Daishonin's time was full of natural disasters, because this powerful force of life was waning and disappearing. Therefore, the natural benevolent forces failed to function. So this indicates the importance, of course, in our daily Gongyo of the first prayer. Why the first prayer is there in Gongyo. because it is through that that we are, as it were, renewing our ichinen every day to maintain our life force and feed the benevolent forces of the universe with it. Do you follow? So it's good to remember when you do that first prayer in the morning, even though you may be still sleepy a bit, or even though you may be a bit negative about doing Gongya, however you get yourself down there, please put your whole heart into the first prayer, because that is feeding the Shoten Zenjin, or the benevolent forces of the universe for that day. All right, everybody. Good. So, as you can see, the nation as a whole, of course that didn't mean every single person in it, but the majority of people were affected by this crazy, mad movement, which was leading to more and more destruction, and of course more and more suffering for the people at home in Japan. And we see it in the actions of the kamikaze pilots, who, for the sake of the emperor and for the glory of the emperor, piloted their planes as human bombs into battleships and that sort of thing. And you see it in the fact that until the very end of the war, when people were losing their belief in the sun goddess, they never gave themselves up as prisoner. If they were wounded and left on the battlefield, they always had a hand grenade with them, and if anyone approached them, they blew themselves up. No one was taken prisoner during the first years of that war. And you see it, of course, also in the terrible cruelty that was committed by some of the soldiers and officers in the Japanese army on quite a wide scale. And as you may know, the Youth Division in Japan have compiled more than 40 volumes where men have courageously talked about the terrible acts that they committed. This all comes out of this distorted mind that I talked about earlier, the breaking of the head into 7 pieces. People behave in a way that they would never dream of behaving normally. This can happen. It happened in Germany. It could happen in our country under the right circumstances, or perhaps I ought to say the wrong circumstances. So I hope that's really clear. So we're going to miss a bit now, and we'll carry on. If you look ahead, those who were imprisoned had to face a pitiable reality. How many paragraphs is that of?
About five paragraphs.
2, 3, 4 paragraphs. I think.
Okay.
All got it? Those who were imprisoned.
Same page.
Okay.
Second column. Those who were imprisoned had to face a pitiable reality. Many suffered bankruptcy in their businesses. Many were chased after by creditors, and still many others lost their source of income and barely survived. Their families also fell into an abyss of sorrow, discarding their faith and doubting Nichiren Daishonin's teachings because they had had little confidence in their practice and their study of the Daishonin's teachings was shallow. Many who were imprisoned gradually began to bend in faith. How cowardly they were. They had little courage or depth of faith, and sadly enough, they didn't recognize the Daishonin as the true Buddha. The persecution of imprisonment was very honorable. It was noble in the eyes of the true Buddha. Being persecuted because of our faith put us in an honored position in the light of Buddhism. Yet, the many who failed to perceive that they were actually showered with honor discarded their faith. 19 out of 21 of Makaguchi's followers turned away from their faith in the Gohonzon, including such senior leaders as Tatsuji.
We won't condemn you to reading those names. All right?
Thank you.
But that doesn't mean to say we're not honoring them. Okay.
Only President Tsunosabu Makaguchi, General Director Josiah Toda, and Director Shuhei Yajima remained stalwart in their faith. How difficult it is to continue to believe in the true law. President Makaguchi died in prison of malnutrition on November the 18th, 1944, never losing pride in standing up to persecution. I didn't know of the death of my mentor, Mr. Makaguchi, for a while. I last saw him in autumn of 1943 at the police station, where we were being processed as prisoners. After that, we were jailed separately in tiny individual cells. We had been master and disciple since I was 20. Our relationship was even deeper than that between parent and child. Every day in the cell I prayed, Daigo Honzen, I am still young, but my master is old, he is 75. Please give me all his suffering and let my master leave prison as soon as possible. President Makaguchi must have sinned profoundly, slandering the Lotus Sutra in his previous lifetimes. The decree of the Buddha was very strict with him. On January the 8th, 1945, 1.5 years after my imprisonment began, I was told Mr. Makaguchi had recently died. When I returned to my cell, I could not stop my tears.
Thank you. So it may seem almost as if he's criticizing President Makaguchi, but he wasn't. His mind, Mr. Toda's mind, was very clear. He spoke very directly and frankly. Yes, Mr. Makaguchi's suffering was great. He had to, in order to fulfill his mission. But on the other hand, he changed, of course, through doing that. He changed his karma. That's what Mr. Toda is saying now. Mr. Toda, President Makaguchi must have sinned profoundly, slandering the Lotus Sutra in his previous lifetime. That's true. But he had this great mission, and he fulfilled it. So much so that we can be all meeting today here in this hall. It's an incredible thing. So this is what he's really emphasizing there. So we'll now skip a bit more, and I'll count the paragraphs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 paragraphs. And we'll start at the paragraph beginning, the indignation I felt when I was freed. All right?
Page 6. The indignation I felt when I was freed could be understood by no one but the Buddha. The Soka Gakkai was completely destroyed, and the members I came across all had serious doubts about the Gohonzon. They bore a grudge against Mr. Makaguchi and hated me. One member, no longer practicing, was Mr. Inosuke Anaba. He had been beaten and verbally abused by Mr. Saiki, a warped policeman and corrupt jailhouse administrator. Mr. Inaba at one time was ready to die. He suffered so much he sneaked away from an interrogation and jumped out of the second-floor window.
That was while he was in prison.
He was sentenced to 4 years in prison, but because he capitulated and wavered in faith, he was released. When I saw him, his life condition was miserable, in animality. Every other leader turned away from the Gohonzon. I myself had made a deep pledge to accomplish Kozenrufu, but I was alone in my quest in war-torn, bombed Japan. Even Mr. Yajima, who had survived this ordeal, was living miserably like a sick animal in a shabby hut. I waited patiently for the right time to commence propagation of the great law. First of all, I expounded the philosophy of the Lotus Sutra. I found out later that this attempt was very slanderous, yet it was my first step to reconstruct the Soka Gakkai.
So this is where Mr. Toda wishes to state his first big mistake. So as you may know, when he was in prison, there was a very strange thing that whenever he asked for a book, he was brought a copy or a book of the Lotus translation of the Lotus Sutra into Japanese. And he didn't want that sort of book. One can't blame him. I think probably he was looking for some sort of detective story or something to keep his mind on his miserable conditions. But he always sent it back to the jailer, and then he asked for the book again, or for a book again, and they always brought him the Lotus Sutra until in the end he realized this wasn't by chance, and that he better get on with reading it. And as he read the Lotus Sutra, he came to many realizations. This was a very important thing for him. And most of all, when he read about the ceremony in the air and the great treasure tower, that part of the Lotus Sutra, this was when he realized with his whole life, after he was chanting Daimoku about this particular section of the Lotus Sutra that he'd read, he realized that he must be a bodhisattva of the earth. and that therefore his mission must be to form the Gakkai again after the war, when he came out of prison, and begin to develop the movement of Kosen Rufu. This was what his burning passion, which drove him forward until his early death in 1958, was based on. So when he first came out, he, of course, was worried about how to develop the faith of the members. And there was no Gosho, remember, available to him. So he'd studied the Lotus Sutra, and he held over and over again several series of lectures on the Lotus Sutra in order to train people to develop their faith. But of course, the Lotus Sutra, which is the teaching of Shakyamuni, is stated as not being the teaching for this age, for the latter day of the law, when it is very clear from Nichiren Daishonin's teachings that so far as this period is concerned, the Lotus Sutra is the Gohonzon of the three great secret laws of 7 characters, Nam-myoho Renge-kyo Nichiren. Right? So, in a way, it wasn't his fault, but he suffered within his own life because he concentrated everything on the Lotus Sutra, whereas he should have been, of course, concentrating everything on Nichiren Daishonin's teachings. And as he saw his own life getting nowhere, more and more difficulties arising in his business and so on, being thwarted in every direction, he eventually went to the head temple, and he spent one whole night kneeling on the stone pavement in front of the building where the Daigohonzon was enshrined. At that time, a small building called the Treasure House. And he knelt on the paving stones and chanted Daimoku all night. And during that long process of Daimoku, those hours and hours in such awful, uncomfortable conditions, he came to the realization that it was because he was teaching the wrong teachings, that is to say, the Lotus Sutra, that his life, rather than advancing, seemed to be going backwards in his own personal life. And coming to that realization, I'm sure had a lot to do, too, with his determination to publish the Gosho in one volume for his members and, of course, for himself, too. Right? So I think we can leave a little bit out there now. And we'll move on to where he talks about his speech at the founding of the Soka Gakkai's, or rather at the Soka Gakkai's 4th general meeting. Have you all got it? It's indented and it starts, Nichiren Shoshu is a religion. Right?
It's on page 6 still.
Nichiren Shoshu is a religion.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Nichiren Shoshu is a religion that has been embracing the teachings of Nichiren Daishonin correctly for 600 some years, from high priest to high priest. Nichiren Shoshu upholds true Buddhism. This Buddhism is capable of leading us to true happiness. We have experienced this day and night through our practice. No matter how culture may have developed in the world, as long as friction or power struggles exist among nations, completely disregarding morality, humanity can never experience true happiness. If, unfortunately, a war breaks out involving the use of atomic bombs, the human race has no choice but to proceed to destruction. I am convinced, however, that Japan has been given by Nichiren Daishonin a great religion that can halt the destruction of humanity. As we recite during our silent prayers, Nichiren Daishonin possesses the 3 virtues of sovereign, teacher, and parent. It is indeed an honor that we, of little virtue, can worship him. We are the Daishonin's subjects, children, and disciples. Nichiren Daishonin is the Buddha of the universe, and to be his subjects, children, and disciples is our great karmic relationship. Nichiren Daishonin appeared to enable us to reveal our Buddhahood, also to show us what Buddha's wisdom is, and thus help us to attain enlightenment. The Daishonin made his advent to allow us ignorant and evil-minded individuals to worship the Daikahonzan. Therefore, it is our supreme benefit to be able to follow the Daishonin's teachings and worship the supreme Daikahonzan as its child, disciple, and subject. We thus have a mission to share the benefits of the Gohonzon with people in suffering, because we are the first to know of its greatness and of our great karma. We must worship it ourselves and also strive to help others to do the same. Whatever may happen to society, good or bad, we have to dedicate ourselves to praying to the Gohonzon and helping others do the same for their happiness. We are just like a rickshaw carrying the ignorant to the Gohonzon. The Gakkai's sole mission is to carry those in confusion to the Dai Gohonzon. The Gohonzon is just like the treasure mountain. It is up to each individual as to how much treasure they can obtain there. In any case, it is the noble mission of the Soka Gakkai to guide the people to the treasure mountain of the Dai Gohonzon. We neither seek honor through religion, nor do we intend to make money with religion, like other newly born religious enterprises. It is indeed a shame if we concern ourselves only with immediate benefits and remain ignorant of the true benefits of the Gohonzon. Recently, some 100 guidance staff were appointed in the Soka Gakkai. It is my great pleasure to advance towards Kosen Rufu together with them.
Good. So this really is an immensely important statement, isn't it? It's rather like the charter, if you like, in terms of faith of the Soka Gakkai, and it stands identical to today. So here he clearly states, which was something in a way quite revolutionary in those days, that we are all children of the Buddha. We are all bodhisattvas of the earth, as predicted by Shakyamuni Buddha in the Lotus Sutra, and that we have this great mission of spreading Kosen Rufu, and as I said earlier, never allowing its flow to cease. This is the mission of the Gakkai. And then he talks about the practice of the Gakkai in this short speech, which is known as Jigyo and Keita. Practice for yourself and practice for others. The two should be inseparable, that our task is to bring those others who are also suffering human beings to the Gohonzon, and to fulfill our function as bodhisattvas of the earth, together with, of course, our own practice of faith. And finally, he says that we are not there to make money. In those days, there were hundreds of new religions springing up in Japan. And he is referring to that, who were extorting huge sums of money out of people, or getting them to pay subscriptions and that sort of thing. This has never been so in the Gakkai, and never will be so, because of the principle that if one is to give, one must give spontaneously from one's heart. Otherwise, it's not a good cause to make. Neither would it be a good cause for the person arranging for people to be forced to give. They too would suffer. So always we should be able to give spontaneously or not give, depending on our circumstances. But of course, to give is one of the greatest causes that you can make, both in terms of one's energy and time, and also in terms of material giving. So to this day, the Gakkai, of course, now consisting of millions of members, is a very wealthy organization. But as fast as they gain, they spend. I think the number of temples alone that they built in Japan is something like 470. And even they donated 200 temples, as you know, towards the 700th anniversary last year, more than half of which, 2/3 of them had been completed. So huge sums. And of course, they gave us Taplo Core. Who's ever heard of such a thing? It's unheard of. No one else could really believe it. And there are no terms, I might say, on how we should repay. We must repay gradually over many, many years. And I'm sure we will do, not only in money, but also in our great efforts for Kosen Rufu. But the fact is that they gave us Taproot Court, which belongs to no one else but NSUK through our trustees. It's an extraordinary thing. So far as our finances are concerned, we walk on a tightrope. We've always walked on a tightrope, ever since I first came back to this country from Japan. But somehow or other, even though our expenditure is growing, of course, as the membership grows, we always just manage. So I'm totally convinced this is because of all of your democracy. That is what enables us always to manage, even though not every member by any means contributes. Not more than half the membership contributes. But always we manage. And of course, as people's faith grows, so they feel they want to give something. And of course, they begin to discover the benefits from doing so. So we manage still to this very day. However, when Sensei was here this last time, he said to us, really, you should start to build a reserve fund. I'm sure in his mind was the upheavals and changes going on in the world and the need to have something in the kitty in case difficulties should arise. So this, we must really try to do. And I'm sure because Sensei said that, time is right for us to be able to do so in one way or another. And so far as Taproot Court is concerned, although we pay money to Taproot Court for its maintenance from our own general NSUK funds, about £50,000 a year, this is nothing to what Japan gives us to help us maintain it as well. So, of course, I look upon us as caretakers of Taproot Court. That's really what we are. We're caretakers of this great building, which is of enormous significance to members throughout the world. And it will continue to be so as our cultural activities there develop. And people understand the greatness of its function. So I feel we're the very fortunate caretakers of this great building for the sake of all the members in the world. Did you think? So this statement of Mr. Toda's years ago, it really does act as a sort of charter for the function and purpose of the Soka Gakkai. All right, let's read on a little more.
As I mentioned at that time, Gakkai activities in those days were undeniably not vigorous enough. However, Japan had been destroyed as a nation, and the Japanese people were in the depths of suffering. The Gakkai naturally had to arise. When the Soka Gakkai began its reconstruction, the Risho Koseikai, a heretical new religion, was also a small organization barely surviving in war-ravaged Japan. This we knew well. However, 7 years later, the Risho Koseikai had grown into a gigantic organization, disseminating its heretical teachings far and wide into society. I asked myself who was to blame for this reality, that is, for allowing a heretical religion to grow so rapidly, while we are the ones who embrace the true Buddhism of Nichiren Daishonin. I had no choice but to answer to myself, the person who leads the Soka Gakkai is to blame. I deeply believed I was spreading Nichiren Daishonin's teachings, yet I used the Lotus Sutra expounded by Shakyamuni as reference material. I made 2 mistakes that the true Buddha could not tolerate. As a result, I had to face severe difficulties. In other words, because I failed to stand up when I should have, because I didn't take the position of Soka Gakkai president that I should have, and because I dabbled in Shakyamuni's Lotus Sutra, I had to undergo the punishment bestowed upon me as a slanderous person. Fortunately, however, instead of falling into the hell of incessant suffering in death, thanks to the compassion of the Gohonzon, I realized what to do from then on.
So the second mistake, as you understand, was that Mr. Toda, wouldn't accept the fact that he had to be president of Soka Gakkai. He strongly resisted it in his life. So much so that he even tried to train other people so that they were good enough to be made president in terms of faith. And I can understand this in a sense, the awesome responsibility which such a post involves, especially in the light of the expansion of the movement for Kosen Rufu in the future. And he says that he lacked the confidence to take it on. And interestingly enough, it took 3 years also for President Ikeda to accept the presidency. And it wasn't until the high priest, Nitatsu Shonin, actually went to him and said, you have to do it, and gave him a few quotations from the Gosho to remind him that that was his mission. He couldn't bring himself to do it. It must be an awesome thought, having to steer a global movement into the future of millions of human beings. So even in a small way, I can understand it, but also probably you can understand it. If you've been asked to be a leader, the immediate reaction is no. Not me. And certainly that happened to me really strongly. When I first, I suppose, intuitively realized that I was likely to have to be leader in the UK. And Mitsuko and I went to the head temple, and I was making all sorts of excuses in my life why I should not be leader of NSUK, everything you can think of. And I just wanted to go and live in a small country town, a place called Chichester in Sussex. And so did Mitsuko, I think, too. And we thought we'd start a small business and gradually get a group which might become a district, all that sort of fantasy. Anyway, in front of the Daigo Honsen, I found myself there in front of the Daigo Honsen, chanting Daimoku and saying, I can't do this thing, I'm sure. Mind you, I hadn't even been offered it then. So I was also able to say, that's just your conceited mind. But I knew in my heart I was going to have to do it. I don't know why, but I just did. And I didn't tell Mitsuko, I can tell you. I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want to do it. But there you are. Then in front of the Daigo Honsen, making all these excuses why I couldn't be a senior leader in the UK, suddenly inside me like an explosion. It's like all my life was saying to me, what do you mean sitting there like that, saying you can't do it, you can't do it? What's this for? Pointing to the Daigo Honsen. This is all going on in my life while I was chanting Daimoku in front of the Daigo Honsen. It's like an explosion. And I said to Mitsuko afterwards that I'd had this great realization, and that if it hadn't been I had a back to the chair I was sitting in front of the Daigo Honsen, and I would have gone over backwards. It was so powerful. So I can understand it. I'm sure many of you, when you were asked to be a leader, oh, no, not me. Anyway, that's good in a way, because